Hello, my name is Felix McGrath. I'm from Ireland. I'd like to thank Brigitte and Maria Vision for a chance to come on here and tell you a little bit about my life. I'll start at the beginning, might be a wee bit easier. I was born in Ireland in 1983, one of 10 children. And my mum had lost quite a few children as well, 3 boys, 1 girl, and had 2 miscarriages. You know, just prior to my birth, the whole family had moved back from England. Back in the 80s, when we came back, Ireland was very poor, and there was a housing crisis as well. So we grew up and we didn't have much. You know, it wasn't by any means a very affluent upbringing. And that, for me, you know, I always wanted to be somebody else. You know, I wanted to be living somebody else's life. I thought that I didn't belong in anyone's creation. That, you know, that I was misunderstood. That there was no plan designated for me. So faith, for me, was just my own plan. You know, I would have to stand up and be counted. That I would have to decide on a plan to survive for myself. That I would have to be strong enough to do that. So I got quite gritty right away. You know, I would have started fights quite a lot when I was a younger child, with other kids at school. You know, I always liked to learn, though. I always liked to read literature, whatever was available to me. We didn't have that many books, you know, in our home, but I would read at school, and always, you know, these novels on princes in faraway lands, and I would think that I was, you know, going to be that. But I did read the Bible, and it did, you know, that we had an illustrated Bible in school, and because I had on a particular occasion fallen out with another pupil, I wasn't allowed to mix with them at break times. So I read this illustrated Bible 3 times, you know, and that was my first, you know, kind of, you know, I'd watch my mother pray the rosary, but that was my first, you know, where I was involved. You know, it wasn't kind of pushed on its faith at home in our house, you know, because there were so many kids to focus on, so many, you know, and I had older sisters, and I'm sure they were a handful, you know, to my mum growing up, like. So, you know, the younger ones kind of self-will run riot, which I kind of liked. You know, I could head away off and do my own thing. But of course, later on, you know, that self-will, you know, became my downfall. You know, I would have went to Mass, you know, quite a bit when I was younger. And as I said, my mum had a great devotion to Our Lady and Padre Pio. You know, I would see her praying to them all the time, reading books on Padre Pio. You know, and I would have prayed with her sometimes, you know. But as I got older, you know, Catholicism didn't fit in with the way that I wanted to live my life. You know, the moral standing you would have to have, you know, I just didn't care for. And that led me down, you know, a road, you know, that today I can see was totally wrong. You know, I have a lot of regret today, you know, on things I done, you know, in my past life, you know. You know, alcoholism, you know, really took a hold of my life, you know. And I can't, you know, thank God enough today that he came into my life again. But I'll tell you a bit about what brought me this far to Medjugorje. I came here in 2022. I just lost my brother to alcoholism. He had died, you know, heart attack. And my wife said to me, you know, you need to pray for your brother, make sure he's gone to heaven. And, you know, he could be in purgatory, you have to pray. And I said, okay, I'll go to Medjugorje with you. She had been here many times. And I came over, but I came over only to, you know, to be the religious pilgrim, you know, to climb the Cross Mountain, to place his picture there and say a prayer, but not really talk to God, you know. You know, this time I'd spoken to God very few times in my life, but only when my back was to the wall, when I wanted something, never to give thanksgiving, you know, for all the good things, you know, that he'd given me. You know, I was, you know, one of 10, and we all lived through hard times in Ireland, and I never thanked him ever for that. You know, it was always poor me, you know. All relationships that ended as a result of my drinking, it was God's fault. You know, it wasn't me who was to blame. You know, God has singled me out for pain, so, you know, it's only what I deserve. But I came here and I didn't really pray to God. You know, I didn't. I went into the church in St. James's in Medjugorje and said a few prayers, but that was it. And I went home and nothing changed. You know, nothing, you know, in my life changed. Only that 5 months after my brother passing, I lost my mother, and it was, you know, a part of my life, you know, that, you know, my mother was everything to me. You know, I heard a priest say before, a bishop actually in Ireland say before, that the first image of God is the face of his mother, you know, and that's the first image that God, you know, that a child sees when they're born. That's who they think God is the face of their mother. And that's exactly the way it was for me. You know, my mother was everything to me, you know. You know, I was so innocent, you know, around her, and, you know, and even if she had heard any stories about me, my antics that might go on when I was out at night with drink, or she would say that's not my failing, you know, which was part of my problem, you know, because I was allowed, you know, I carried on. You could never do wrong in a mother's eyes, you know, and I think that's so of our Blessed Mother, you know, here in Medjugorje. So, as I was saying, my mum passed away. And when I came home from Medjugorje, I had rosary beads, you know, and I thank God now today that my father had them. But I came home and I had lots of stuff for my sisters and my mum and stuff, and I was handing them out. Just after my brother's passing, I handed out these rosary beads and stuff, and I didn't think I had anything from my father, who wasn't in his faith. And he queued up behind my sisters to receive something, and I found a set of rosary beads in the bottom of the hold all I had, and I handed them off to my father anyway, and he put them into his pocket and walked away. And I thought that was it. And as I said, I lost my mum, and 14 weeks later my father passed away, and he started to choke, and it brought on a heart attack. And I got the call from my sister to say that Dad had taken a turn, and that could I come right away. And I went round to the house, and I just seen that he had rosary beads clenched in his hand. And the addiction had quite a grip on me, you know, at the time, and I wasn't really grieving, you know, for my mother, really grieving properly for my brother. And I ended up that at the wake, my father's wake, I seen the rosary beads, and I said to my sister, I said, what's the story with the rosary beads? Well, she said, Dad was never without them since you brought them home from Medjugorje. And in fact, he grabbed them in his hands before he passed away. And I sobered up, you know, quite quickly. And because it was an Irish wake, as you know, people have a few drinks at it. So I probably had too many. And that was it. I sobered up, and I really talked to my father that night. You know, something I hadn't done for 20 odd years. You know, talked to him, you know, like a man. And he had passed on, you know, but you know, we were having a conversation, and I said that I'm not going to leave it as long. You know, I'm gonna try and get back. You know what you give me in baptism. And I did. As soon as the opportunity arose, my wife says, I'm making a pilgrimage to Medjugorje. It was about 6 months or 8 months after that. And I came, and here, you know, I discovered a peace, you know, that I never had before. You know, and I left, adoration, I hadn't heard tell of it. You know, where you sit and adore the Blessed Sacrament. You know, where you have confession. You know, I hadn't confessed in 30 years. You know, my first confession at the site of St. James's, it was such a special thing, such a special occasion. You know, it was 40 minutes in confession, and that wasn't it. I had to go back quite a few times. You know, and I walked away from the priest, and there was a pool of tears on the ground. I don't know whether it was from me or from him. You know, it was, it's so beautiful, you know, that we have the sacraments, you know, that we have that sacrament of confession. And I kept going back, you know, and it's like, I discovered AA in Medjugorje, you know, because I didn't feel worthy for being able to go into the church. So I found somebody like me, you know, another addict, you know, another group of addicts, you know, and they accepted me, because I thought, you know, nobody wanted me. You know, I was a mistake, you know, that you know, I was good for nothing. And the addicts accepted me, and they brought me into a room, and they told me what was wrong with me. You know, you have a spiritual malady. You know, you have a hole in your soul that there's nothing there. You know, you need to fill it with something. You know, you need to have a spiritual, you know, awakening. And I listened, you know, and I never listened before to anybody, because I knew everything. You know, it was my way, because my way worked, you know, for a while. You know, I could get away with, you know, I could do my own thing, and then, you know, if it didn't work out, like most addicts, I'd blame somebody else. You know, but when it came really down to it, I couldn't solve the problems that was occurring in my life. Only God could. And I think that fear that most addicts, you know, that drives their addictions, was present. And I think that in my life a lot, and I think that it's only when my nearest and dearest started to go that then the real fear started to, you know, how are you living your life? You know, if you go to God, you know, if you're lucky enough, where are you going? Will you see your loved ones again if you keep continuing on this path you're on? You know, so that fear, I think, because fear drives addicts, you know, and that fear drove me in the right direction. You know, it made me want to be a better person, you know, and do the right things. So as I said, I went to AA, and they advised me, go to confessions, you know, go to adoration, spend time with the Lord, you know, fill your soul with something other than your addiction, you know, because it's a nagging, gnawing. Anyone that's in addiction, they know it's, you know, you think you can defeat it, but it will creep up on you, you know, when you least expect it. So it's a daily reprieve for me, you know. A long time AA member told me before, Felix, he said, the best thing you can do in recovery, he says, is when you go to bed at night, he says, push your boots all the way into the wall, all the way in under your bed into the wall. He said that when you get up in the morning, that you have to fall down on your knees to take your boots out. And he says, when you're down there, he said, surrender your day to God. And he said, that way, he said, if you surrender your day, if you give it over to God in the morning, when you wake up, he said, your day will go better. And it is that way for me today. I have to surrender my day. I have to receive the Eucharist, and I have to get adoration in. But adoration doesn't necessarily need to be in front of the tabernacle, or, you know, some people say, oh, you can adore Jesus anywhere. I feel that's been my experience. You know, I heard a priest in St. James's say that he has a built-in Eucharistic GPS, that he knows where the Blessed Sacrament is in his community. And he asked the question, you know, that you know, it stirred something in me, you know, would I know where it is in my community, you know, at home, you know, and I'm sure it did in the parishioners as well. Because it's easy to know where he is in Medjugorje, but when you leave Medjugorje, do we know where he is? Do we know what direction he's in? Because he's really present, you know. And today I'm so grateful, you know. I'm grateful I have AA and the fellowship of AA. I'm grateful I have Medjugorje, and it's the locals here are absolutely powerful people, you know, a real testament, you know, to a bit like the Irish, but without the gossip. You know, I love my pilgrimage here, you know, and I love the freedom from addiction, you know, that it's given me, and opportunities, you know, to be a better person. But it's not easy. It's not an easy road, but it's a far more rewarding road to be on. You know, I heard today from today's first reading, it said, you know, about Saul. He persecuted the apostles on the road to Damascus. That was me. You know, and Jesus had to appear to him. I've had many miracles, you know, many miracles has happened to me, like, and in Medjugorje, you know. I asked on one such instance here in Medjugorje, I went up to Apparition Hill and asked Our Lady to take my will to drink from me all my life. And when I looked up from my phone, there was no lights on Apparition Hill, and anyone that knows Apparition Hill, the lights are always on. That day was the 28th of August, last August 28th, and it's the feast day of St. Augustine. And you know, I haven't taken a drink since that, and that was St. Augustine's feast day, and I'd like to think he was you know, a bit like me, a bit of a wide boy, you know, and through his mother's intercession, you know, he was able to become a saint. Now, sainthood is probably a bit far off from me, but you know, look at Sister Claire Crockett, you know, you know, I will strive to be, you know, better, you know, and maybe sainthood might be on the cards. You know, my mum always told me that I was destined for great things, like, as everyone's mum does say that to them, you know. But she really believed it. I'd like to, you know, in her memory, I'd like to be better, you know. But for myself, just to, you know, as well, you know, because, you know, and for God, like, because He, you know, He loved me, you know, into existence, and I know that today. You know, and He has a plan for me, you know. I don't know what it is, and it's not always easy. Sometimes His plan, you know, so some days will be hard, some days will be easy, you know. But I know, I said it before to a friend of mine. I says, I have Our Lady behind me, and as it would happen, there was an Our Lady picture on the wall behind me, and you know, but I meant that. I have Our Lady behind me, and I have, you know, I have no fear. You know, I have no fear of the future anymore. Or, you know, I know that if I have God in my life, you know, if I was Blessed Mother, you know, if I received the sacraments, you know, that things will be all right.